Hey everybody, this is Refresh and I'm here to tell you a little bit about my Core Set 2020 pre-release for Magic: The Gathering. For Core Set 2020 pre-release, you receive this pre-release pack, and inside you get this wide sort of deck box, which opens up. You get a spin down life counter. You get one of these how to build the deck guides, helping you build a sealed deck with pretty good advice. I find this to be quite useful. You get one tip card or token possibly, and on the back is a code that you can use to get 6 packs on Magic: The Gathering Arena. I've already used this code, so don't try to download and redeem this particular code, but this is a notable downgrade from the last code that you got in pre-release, which got you a full draft, and before that there was even a full sealed that you could get. However, it's still something that you get, and it still helps tie this experience into Arena. I just wish that it sort of replicated what you were getting here in getting you another sealed deck experience. But that is the tip card. In my case, I got a turn phase reference card, which is, I guess, okay for beginners. It combos pretty well with the how to build a deck guide right here. You also get a stamped promo card. In my case, it was the Flood of Tears, which is not that great in sealed. In addition to that, you get 6 packs of Magic. I opened my 6 packs and everything is in here. And then with these 6 packs, you build the best deck that you can. There's no bells and whistles at all for this core set pre-release outside of this pre-release pack. And so you don't really get much of a special experience, which is kind of too bad, given the fact that this is a set that's supposed to be particularly friendly to beginners. But as it is, it was still an acceptable experience. I just wish that there was something more exciting to draw newcomers in and help them get more excited for the game than this very basic presentation. So these are all the cards that I opened. In addition to the promo Flood of Tears, the other rares that I opened included the Agent of Treachery over here. I also opened a Knight of the Ebon Legion here, the Villainous Broker of Blood here, the Voracious Hydra here, Kethis the Hidden Hand as a mythic, and finally Field of the Dead. Of these, Kethis and Field of the Dead were completely useless. Just looking at the colors, red was immediately out because I simply didn't have enough spells in that color, and so it was out. That left the remaining 4 colors in relatively even amounts. In terms of bombs, my bombs were the Agent of Treachery, which lets you gain control of a target permanent. The other text basically doesn't matter, but if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, then you'll draw 3 cards at the beginning of your end step. That's never going to happen in this particular set unless you have some way of getting Agent of Treachery back from the graveyard after sacking it multiple times to steal more creatures, and by the time you're stealing the first creature, you should probably be turning the game around and or winning. The other bombs were the Knight of the Ebon Legion, which is a 1-drop that with 2 and a black mana you get +3/+3 and Death Touch for it. And then if any player had lost 4 life by the end of your turn, then it will get a +1/+1 counter. So whether it's you taking damage on your own turn or you dealing damage, it gets stronger, and that is quite the imposing threat. There's Villainous Broker of Blood, which is a bomb, but he also costs 8 mana. He's a bomb because he's a flying 8/8, and that you can pay a black and 2 life in order to give -1/-1 to a target creature. But whenever you lose life, you draw that many cards, and that's why he's quite powerful. However, at 8 mana, he's very hard to play in Limited. In green, we have the Voracious Hydra. It can scale to whatever size that you need it to, and either it doubles the number of counters, which is X, on it, or as it enters the battlefield, you can have it fight another creature, so that flexibility is really nice. So just looking at the potential bombs, I kind of counted white out, leaving us with blue, black, and green. And then I took a look at the various cards and kind of looked at the curves, and it looked like black had the most number of playables, and so it was going to definitely be in. And of course, this also rules out everything here except for Risen Reef and Moldervine Reclamation. And then Risen Reef also goes out because black needs to be one of my colors, and there just simply aren't enough elementals to support it. So Moldervine Reclamation remained the only card of the multicolor cards that I was even going to consider. Between these colors, black would be the center, especially having both Disfigure and Murder in the card pool. Those are very good cards. And then looking at the remainder of the cards, there simply weren't enough good creatures in green. There were good creatures in green, don't get me wrong. The Barkhide Troll is really good. The Brightwood Tracker is not bad. The Nightcaster Spider is also not bad. The Thicket Crasher is not bad. The Voracious Hydra is great. And the Wolf Rider Saddle isn't bad either. However, that's about it. In blue, we had some flyers, and some pretty good flyers, like the Air Elemental, the Boreal Elemental, and then the Warden of Evos Isles, which made flying creatures cheaper, including the 2 Gorging Vultures in black. And so, with that, and seeing that Agent of Treachery might be one of the biggest bombs that I have, and blue had a little bit more card draw and fixing, and green only really provided Rabid Bite in terms of removal, I ended up going with black and blue. So this is a deck that I ended up building. As you can see, it has a fairly natural curve there, with a bit more aggression in the low drops, and then as you get a little higher and higher, there are less and less creatures, and then a lot of relatively inexpensive spells as well. 3 removal spells, including the Vial of Dragonfire, some tempo spells like Unsummon, some card draw in Winged Words, an Ursat's removal spell in Blade Brand, and more card advantage in Mind Rod, as well as a Marauder's Axe, which is a sort of enchantment that will help my flyers as well as my Blood Burglar do a bit more damage. In addition to this, I had 9 swamps and 8 islands. This is what the deck ended up as, but in the very first game I played with Vilis, the Broker of Blood, in the deck instead of the Vial of Dragonfire, and I realized very quickly that getting to 8 mana without any acceleration, aside from the Warden of Evos Isle, is not something that I can really reliably count on, and this card was just dying in my hand, and so I just removed it outright and replaced it with the Vial of Dragonfire, because I noticed that there are a lot of X2 creatures in this particular format, and so the Vial actually ended up turning out to be a pretty good way to get rid of annoying blockers or attackers, really. So this is what I sleeved up and took into my games. So how did I do in my games? Well, not too well. For the very first game, I was playing against a fellow Dimir player, and I had the mulligan to 6 off of looking at a 1-land hand, and then my second hand had 4 lands and 2 spells. Seeing that going to 5 was going to be pretty bad for me, I decided to keep that, and then I proceeded to draw mostly lands for most of that game, causing my opponent to gain a lot of life off of his Blood Burglar and also take me down quite a bit, and eventually he was playing threats while I was playing a Marauder's Axe, which is clearly not going to win me any games, and so I lost that one very quickly. In the second game, I was on the play, and I kept a relatively risky 2-lander, but it was 1 color of each of my lands, and I had some 2-drops, and I had my Knight of the Ebon Hold, which was quite the bomb at the very start of the game. I just started attacking with it. My opponent felt like he had to chump all the time, and caused my opponent to lose most of his creatures. At some point, we hit a little bit of a stall, but I broke through with more creatures and more removal, and then went for the win. In our third game, my opponent was on the play, and I saw another 2-lander. It had a 2-drop and a 3-drop and so forth, and I thought, okay, this is a hand I could probably keep, and all I need to do is draw 1 more mana to get where I need to go. And you know what? I didn't draw the mana for several turns, and I played my only 2-drop and my axe, and then lost everything, and by the time I was able to cast my 1 3-drop, I was already down to 8 life, and my opponent already had a strong board presence, and so it was just Chump City from there. He got a ton of life, again, off of his Blood Burglar, and that was the end of the game. There was no coming back from that, and lost my first match that way. My second match was against an Azorius deck. In my first game, I saw a 3-lander, but they were all islands, and I had a mix of blue and black spells, so I thought maybe I can keep this. All I need to do is draw 1 swamp and I'll unlock the rest of my hand. It'll be great. I actually didn't draw another swamp for the entire game. I just drew more than half the islands in my deck, and so I could only cast a couple spells. The couple spells that I cast were taken care of by my opponent's removal, and I got crushed under the weight of Color Screw. The second game went a bit more favorably for me. I had answers to my opponent's spells, plenty of good creatures on the attack, and I just kind of won by attrition in this particular case. In our final game, I started with a mulligan to 6 and kept a 3-lander with 3 spells. My opponent didn't mulligan at all. This was a pretty fair game. We traded forces a lot, and eventually my opponent blew me out with a dangerous, inspiring charge, and I managed to trade on that by unsummoning his Flying Lord. And so that did get me some trades, but my board never recovered. My opponent went wider than me and had me at a disadvantageous life total. And then my opponent finished me off with his Griffin Protector, and so that was the end of me. That series went 1-2 again. In my third match, I played against a 3-color Abzan player, and my opponent flooded out really hard in the first hand. So I just took it because my opponent had very little to cast, and I went wide with, actual spells. It helped that I had a Knight of the Ebon Hold, but that almost didn't matter because even if that were a regular 2-2, I would have won that one just because my opponent was just drawing all lands that game. In our second game, we were a little bit more evenly matched. My opponent was on the play, and he took that advantage and went with it. He went wide and managed to hit me pretty hard with multiple inspiring charges, and at that point my life total was so low that I was stuck on defense and with very few creatures because of his removal. And so he went wide, went around my few blockers that I had, and took me out that way. In our final game, I started on the back foot with a 2-lander, and they were both swamps, and I was unable to cast most of my spells for most of the game. So my opponent played his creatures, attacked me, and there was little I can do but take the hits until I eventually was able to cast 1 spell at a time from my hand, which was mostly used to chump and sometimes block creatures, but because at this point my opponent had gone big and had gone wide, and there was little that I could do but lose the game, taking me to 0-3 matches in all 1s and 2s with 1 or 2 games lost to Mana Screw or Color or Mana Flood in each instance. And in my very last match, it was against another Abzan player, and in the very first game, I took a mulligan to 6 because I didn't want to keep a 1-lander. My opponent, on the other hand, ended up flooding pretty hard, and so even though I kept the 1-lander, I just was able to play creatures, and my opponent didn't, and that gave me the win. Our final game was much better played for both of us. My opponent was on the play, and we played a lot of creatures. We traded for a while, and I had a very strong board state at one point, but he played Planar Cleansing, destroyed everything off the board, and then we got into the top deck war, and from there on, I drew spells and he drew lands, and so I won off of just drawing better than my opponent. Sure, it feels like the random number god sometimes is handing the games and the matches to me or taking them from me, but that is just how Magic is sometimes. Going 1-3 got me 1 participation pack for all my efforts. One thing that I should note about this particular set is that the packaging on the cards has changed. The wrapping here is a lot thicker than I remember it being in the past, so that's something notable. And the cardstock quality appears to have changed a little as well. You can sort of feel it in the glossiness and the bounce and the feel of the cards, as well as the way that the colors are printed on the cards. They seem a little bit more muted than previous cards. And then I also opened a notorious misprint in the Corpse Knight. It's supposed to be a 2-mana 2/2, but it says 2/3 here. And these cards seem to be a little bit more fragile than previous cards in terms of the chipping on the edges. Overall, I want to say that the Core Set 2020 pre-release experience is fairly ho-hum. They didn't really do much to make this particular set special, especially for newbies, but it is nice that the set is relatively easy to understand and does feel like there is some power to replace the fact that the set doesn't really have much special going on with it in terms of themes. Anyway, let me know what your pre-release experiences were like in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more such videos, hit subscribe. This is Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.